You know the man very well. What do you make of that performance, the tone of it, and what he said?
Well, this is really what President Trump's superpower was going back to 2016 when he beat Hillary Clinton. The fact that using language that's much closer to what regular people use, very non-politician type language, is how he sends that message that he's not the politician. He's not the part of the problem. And as we see right now with the disaster going on with Joe Biden, in fact, you had a brilliant column, I thought, for the GBNews website where you talked about Biden effectively gifting to President Trump this next presidency. People do not have trust in their professional politicians right now. I think President Trump cuts through the clutter when he uses very direct language like that.
Is there any reputational damage for Donald Trump, given the fact that he did begin this conversation about the Taliban taking over Afghanistan and allied troops leaving?
No, I don't think so at all. In fact, one of the things that President Trump ran on that was very popular here in the U.S.
Do you think that Donald Trump has a case to answer for engaging with the Taliban and doing that deal at the tail end of his presidency?
Well, I think so. One of the things that President Trump did is that he set really the terms that he was going to get the U.S. out of Afghanistan, but he was going to do it smartly. In fact, he was going to get the people out, get Americans out, get those who'd been supportive of the U.S. efforts and the coalition efforts, get those people out, people who've been interpreters, loyal allies, things like that. But he also had a very tough talk with the leader of the Taliban and said, if you come into Kabul and you start killing people, you start massacring people, I'm going to drop a bomb on your head. Now, that might not be the most diplomatic way to go and phrase it, but guess what? The Taliban understood that. But with Joe Biden, they know that he's just not going to step up. He doesn't invoke fear among our enemies or a sense of loyalty among our allies, and that's really the key problem right now. And it's part of the reason why President Trump is seeing this resurgence just only a few months after he's left the White House.
Does that mean, Jason, and I know this is a very difficult question to answer because no one can read the mind of Donald J. Trump, and many have tried. But would he have delayed the withdrawal of allied troops? I mean, if he were president now, would what has happened in the last few days have happened? Or would we have seen a military presence for months or years to come?
Great question. And I would say that I don't think President Trump would have delayed it. The one thing that I of course, don't have the crystal ball to go and predict this, but I think it would have been very tough to completely remove the United States. So there probably would have been some aspect of a residual force. I mean, that would have taken a bit longer. But I know that I spent about 2 hours with President Trump last Tuesday, and we talked about this in detail. And he walked me through how his plan, again, was to make sure that we got our equipment out, or made sure that the equipment was not something that could then be handed over to the Taliban, as we're seeing these images of the Taliban now having the armored vehicles and the rocket launchers and things like that. Make sure we get our people to safety. So it would have been a much orderly, much smarter way to go about doing it. But I do think you raise a good point. That probably would have been impossible to get completely out without leaving some small residual force, at least for a period of time, because even the threats of dropping a bomb, so to speak, on the heads of the Taliban, probably just that alone wouldn't have completely deterred them.
You've spent time, just as you mentioned a matter of days ago, with Donald Trump. How's his health? How are his energies? And what's his mood?
He's doing great. Somehow he's left the presidency and he's lost 15 or 20 pounds, looks about 10 years younger. I think I've gained 15 or 20 pounds and look about 10 years older since he's left the presidency. So I'm not sure how that's happened, but he's playing golf. He's relaxing, visiting with friends. But as we saw last night in Alabama, he's also getting out and making his voice heard. One of the things that we talked about in depth was his potential return to social media, which I'm very much advocating as the CEO of Getter, the new social media platform. And so we had a good length discussion on that. We don't have no white smoke yet coming out of the Vatican, but I'm still working on it.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, this is a very, very interesting question about what's going to happen next. Many people think if there were a presidential election tomorrow, that Donald Trump would walk it. Does he really want to wait 3 years to get back into the White House?
Well, of course he doesn't want to wait. He'd love to get back in tomorrow. But the way the Constitution is set up, that's the next time there'll be an election. The one thing, President Trump did not use the exact words, "I am running," when I met with him this past week, but it's very clear in speaking with him that I believe he is running, and I believe he is focused on doing this. Obviously, he's very upset with how some of the election challenges and now some of the election counting went after 2020, but he has not lost the fire in the belly, and the fact that he can draw upwards of 50,000 people to a rally shows that his base is still very much intact. This is completely uncharted territories here in the United States, where President Trump and his political committee has more money on hand, over $100 million US, even more so than the Republican National Party, which is quite astounding.
Do you think that if Donald Trump gets back into the White House in 3 years' time, that he would consider sending troops back into Afghanistan? Would he bomb the Taliban?
Well, I think there are two different questions there. I think as far as putting in a new troop force that's going to stay around, I think he would definitely avoid that. I do not see that as being a scenario. We did not see any of that when he was in the White House. Of course, there were no new wars that were started while President Trump was in the White House. First time in a long time that we've had that here. And in fact, if anything, he took a rather unconventional approach, whether it be Kim Jong-un in North Korea or even regarding some of the other powers around the world, folks who've threatened to develop nuclear weapons, things like that. But I do think that President Trump showed, say, for example, with Syria, when you have innocents being killed, that he won't hesitate to use U.S. force, but he does not want to go and put U.S. boots back on the ground once he's withdrawn them from a country.
What's Donald Trump's verdict and what's your verdict on President Joe Biden? Is he a man of poor judgment? Is he incompetent? Or has he lost his marbles?
Great question. I think it's probably a combination of all of the above. In fact, one of the things a lot of folks might not realize is Joe Biden initially ran for president in 1988, dropped out in a spectacular failure after plagiarizing Neil Kinnock, using the exact same language for years and years of folks working in the coal mines and playing football, almost word for word. In 2008, Biden came up short, and again he got some 2% in the polls, but Barack Obama picked him up off the scrap heap. And even Obama himself would mock Joe Biden while he was the vice president. I think there was, from the mainstream media, a lot of folks in the U.S., this desire to just get rid of President Trump. If we only get rid of President Trump and stop the mean tweets, they would say, at least proverbially speaking, life would go back to normal. But now what we're seeing with the absence of real leadership looks like he doesn't look, Mark, like he really has full grasp of his functions. All of the events that they have him do are 3, 4 in the afternoon. I'm not sure if that's because he has to go to bed or what exactly is going on, but he does not lend any sort of confidence, again, to whether it's the American people or our allies abroad, folks in the UK, that he has a full grasp on the situation. That's concerning, not just with regard to Afghanistan, but think about China, even the U.S.'s southern border. It's pretty concerning.
My colleague tonight, member of our panel broadcaster, John Gaunt, has suggested that if Joe Biden were to step down, and I personally think there's a good chance that in the next year or two he may well step down due to poor health, that it's not even the threat of Kamala Harris, his deputy, that could take over, but possibly Hillary Clinton. What do you think of that?
Well, as much as I'd love Crooked Hillary to come back into the mix and have her as the political foil, I just don't see that as happening. I think Americans are really frustrated by the politicians who've been around for decades. But you make another smart point with regard to Joe Biden, and that Kamala Harris, the vice president, has shown that she's definitely not up to the job either. I mean, just the fact that the U.S., the White House, is sending her to Singapore, into Asia at this moment of crisis. And again, it's not just Afghanistan. We have hyperinflation. We have this immigration crisis. We have all these issues going on in the U.S. This is really a bizarre time to send her to the Far East. I just don't understand that at all. But there is a crisis in confidence, I believe, in leadership in the U.S. And if Joe Biden were to not run for re-election in 2024, I think Kamala Harris would face a rather steep challenge, whether it be from California Governor Gavin Newsom or any of a handful of other Democratic leaders who would not give her a free pass. I don't think the Democrats have much more confidence in her than the rank and file American voting public does.
And what about, Jason, rivalry for the Republican nomination? I mean, clearly it's Donald Trump's to lose, but Ron DeSantis in Florida has made a name for himself, lifting COVID restrictions, granting freedom to the people of Florida and watching cases fall into the bargain. Very much vindicated by that decision to trust the citizens of Florida. Quite the opposite of the strategy we've seen in New York and California, Democratic states. Ron DeSantis, a rival to Trump?
Well, Ron DeSantis is a very, very formidable political figure. I'm not sure if Ron would actually run against President Trump in a primary. He's very ambitious where he wants to go, but I don't think he would take President Trump on. I think Ron DeSantis could potentially be a vice president pick if President Trump does run again. I don't think he'll go with Mike Pence, his previous vice president. But if President Trump were to not run, I think right now the field is very much Ron DeSantis. It's his to lose. But again, it's a long road to the coronation. But DeSantis has shown that he's going to be a formidable force in future years.
Question. It's obviously a long time between now and the election. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. So Donald Trump, if he gets back into the White House in 3 years' time, how might he approach the job differently based upon what he learned?
That's a couple things. At the beginning of his presidency in 2017, I think he tried to bring in a lot of folks from a well-intentioned goal, bringing a lot of folks who didn't agree with him necessarily on his policy positions, but he hoped that he would build bridges by bringing in certain personnel. And that didn't work. He ended up having a lot of folks that undermined him. He ended up having essentially a fight on several flanks, not just the Democrats, the opposition party, not just the proverbial deep state when we talk about Robert Mueller and the investigations and all of that. But he had to fight off a lot of the entrenched Republicans as well. I think President Trump, if he gets back in, I think he will avoid bringing in a lot of people who disagree with him. There'll be a lot of people who have the same goals when it comes to the policy positions. I think that'll be first and foremost. But I think, too, he won't have to waste the first 2 or 3 years of his presidency fighting off the nonsense political witch hunts, as he always describes them. We've gone through this mess with Robert Mueller, all the Russia nonsense, and I don't think that the American people are going to buy it the way that they did the first couple of years in 2017, 2018.
Jason, brilliant to speak to you. I look forward to catching up soon. Thanks for your time.